We hear about the Middle East so much, right? Conflict, politics. But what about the people who've lived it? I mean, really lived it. For centuries, generations, in the same place. That's got to be a different perspective.
Yeah, totally. Talk about a story to tell.
Right. And that's kind of what got me interested in this Voice from the East podcast. It's put out by the Assyrian Monitor for Human Rights, and it features these, well, I guess you could say overlooked communities, Christians and minorities in the Middle East.
A part of the world that definitely doesn't get enough attention.
No, it really doesn't. And even the name Voice from the East, it's like they're taking back their narrative.
Totally. It's pushing back against being spoken for sure.
Right.
You know, this idea of we have our own stories.
Exactly. And they don't shy away from the tough stuff either. They mentioned pressing human rights issues right off the bat. What comes to your mind with that, in this specific context, I mean?
Oh, well, it's complex. It's layered. You can't separate the history from the politics from what's happening socially. We're talking freedom of religion, violence, displacement, even trying to hold on to a cultural identity when everything around you is changing. Discrimination is almost built into how things work over there.
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, though. What's a specific example that illustrates this? Something concrete.
Okay, well, look at the Coptic Christians in Egypt lately. There's been violence, so much of it. Attacks on their churches, businesses, even individuals targeted. It's terrifying. Like, imagine living with that every single day, that fear.
That's awful, especially for a community that's been there for so long.
Exactly. And they're not the only ones. And this podcast, they mention working with activists, people on the ground, but also experts. That's huge to get both sides of the story.
Totally. The lived experience alongside the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like, I don't know, only seeing one tree and not the whole forest.
That's a great way to put it. And they actually focus on three big themes, which we'll get into. Human rights, democracy, and cultural diversity. What makes those so essential in this context?
Well, they're all connected, aren't they? You can't really separate them. Human rights, well, a lot of that comes down to how a country is actually run. Like they mentioned, a lack of democracy, that's a major problem.
Yeah, and you can see how that would impact minorities especially hard.
Absolutely. If you don't have a say in how things are run, if the law doesn't protect you equally, you're vulnerable. Education, jobs, even just basic services, they can all be impacted.
It's like they're up against so many challenges at once.
That's what makes this podcast, giving them a platform, so important right now.
And it really hits home, that this is bigger than just politics. We're talking about people's lives, cultures, who they are, even the words they use, untold stories, plight of the displaced, struggle to preserve identity. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, and it's not just words. These are real situations. Like when they talk about the plight of the displaced, I immediately think about the Yazidis in Iraq,
Oh, absolutely. They've been through so much.
Exactly. And it just shows you what can happen when a group is targeted because of their religion, especially during a conflict. Their homes are gone, the things they face, the brutality. It's a reminder of why giving these stories a platform is so important.
Giving a voice to the people who've been silenced, right? So those stories aren't lost.
Yes. And it ties into that whole struggle to preserve identity thing, too. It's not just about physically surviving. It's about holding on to your culture. Imagine being told, basically, to abandon your language, traditions, the things that connect you to your past, your ancestors. That's devastating, just as bad as any physical harm in a lot of ways.
It's like losing a part of yourself.
Exactly. And that's why these platforms like Voice from the East, they matter. They're shining a light on those battles, those struggles. Because if those cultures vanish, we all lose something. The world becomes a little less interesting, less diverse.
It's a good reminder, though, that even with all that darkness, all those struggles, there's still hope. That's something they emphasize too, right?
It's huge. You have to. It's like, yeah, things are bad. But you also have to look at how strong these people are. Their spirit, it's amazing.
What's an example of that resilience then? How does that actually play out?
Well, how about the Assyrian Christians in Syria? War's been raging there, but they've still managed to set up schools in the refugee camps, community centers, trying to keep their language alive, their traditions. They could have given up, but they didn't. That's resilience right there.
It's incredible, isn't it? The power of community, holding on to hope even when things are so bleak.
Absolutely. And that's a powerful message, don't you think? This isn't just about getting by. It's about truly living, keeping those traditions, those identities alive for the next generation and the ones after that.
It really makes you think about how much we lose sight of when we just focus on the headlines,
Yeah.
Like, these are real people, real cultures being torn apart. These stories deserve to be told.
Exactly. It's about connecting with that human element. It makes us challenge our own assumptions about the world. It makes us better, honestly, more informed.
And this message, of resilience, of keeping those cultures alive, it feels like they want to reach everyone with it, not just people in the region. Like their tagline, Voice from the East, they put it in 3 languages, Arabic, English, and Swedish.
Yeah, it's subtle, but it shows you they're thinking globally. These issues, they're not just limited to one place. Everyone can learn something from them.
It's creating a space for people to talk, to find common ground, right? Especially since these communities, they're often misrepresented or just forgotten.
Exactly. It's about them taking control of how their stories are told, making sure they're heard.
It's been really eye-opening, Diving into this podcast, it shows you how much you miss when you only focus on the loudest voices in the room.
Right. There's value in seeking out different perspectives, listening to those who are usually drowned out. It's how we grow.
And shouldn't we all be doing that more? No matter who we are, where we come from? Searching out those stories that haven't been told, learning from experiences that are different from ours. That's how we build a better world, right?
Yeah.
A fairer one. Kinder.
Because when we listen to these stories, we change. They push us to be better to each other, to build a world where everyone feels like they matter.
That's a powerful thought. This whole deep dive into Voice from the East, it's really reminded me that sometimes the most important voices are the ones we haven't heard yet. So, to everyone listening, keep your ears open, stay curious, and remember, even in a world that feels really loud, there are still whispers. You just have to listen closely enough to hear them.